Welcome back, Louise. I'm so glad that you're able to rejoin us on the HSI channel. And for the people who are joining us today, I'm just going to remind everybody that Louise was with us earlier and told us about a very large project that she had been involved in a while back that made use of many of the sorts of things that we talk about in the HSI program. And she agreed to come back today and kind of delve into some of the specifics that went on during that larger project. And Louise, I think you said that you were going to talk about the 5-day residential that was part of that larger program today.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for having me back. So, just to give maybe some context for people of what we're talking about, this 5-day residential was one event or one intervention in a larger scale project, which lasted about 4 years, and it was about um, a national association that had a fairly large association with about 30,000 members across the country, and they wanted to rethink the way they were doing business. And so part of what we were doing with them was a whole strategy piece that was based on the framework that Roger Martin developed for strategy, talking about what business are you in, where do you play, how do you win, that framework. And then once we had that down, we then went to the second part of this project, which the 5-day residential was a cornerstone of, which was redesigning the governance structure of the organization. Now, in order to get a sense of what we were dealing with, this was a fairly old organization, association, and so the governance structure was something that had been built on for years, and things had sort of stacked up in a way. But to get a representation of what it looked like, it was modeled after the Canadian Federation pretty much. So there was 13 offices in each province and territory, plus I won't get into why, but there was two offices of national scope. Each of these had their staff, large or small, and then they had each of them had a board of directors. Each of them had a council above that. There was then the national board. There was a series of committees. So there was a lot. At 1,500 volunteers were part of the governance of the association. And so when we started, the national board was actually 60 people. Anytime the board met, 60 people came to town, and 24 of those were voting members. So this was quite large. So when we started talking about governance, we interviewed all those 60 people, and the very first question we asked was, so what do you think of the current governance structure of the association? And their responses were to the effect that it was extremely complicated, that it was antiquated, and a lot of them, because this is the leadership of the association, makes it surprising, a lot of them said, we don't actually really understand how it works. So we knew there was an issue, we knew they had a problem, and the consultation brought that to light in a way that people who perhaps initially were not really thinking about reopening the governance or thinking about these things, which can tend to get messy and complex, were had to say, yeah, we have to look at this. It makes no sense. So that's where there was a steering committee that had been formed, 15 people that were people from across the country who had each been in a leadership role at one point in the organization. So there was the ex-president of the association, an ex-president of one of the chapters of the association. We had 10 volunteers and 5 senior staff as part of that group, very diverse, and pretty much every way for the system. And so these people were the people that got together for this 5-day residential.
Now, can I ask one quick question?
Yes.
So, and I'm asking this question because it's something that that students in the HSI program often want to talk about a little bit. So, you brought these people together for 5 days. You proposed that to them, you discussed it with them, and they came together for 5 days. And so, I can just hear some of my students saying to me, 5 days? I
Never
had
happened.
trouble getting people to come together for 2 hours or 3 hours. And, for a small process consulting project, I tell students that it's really good to get the system together at least for 3 hours and really push to make sure that you get at least 3 hours in order to delve into what's going on in the system with everybody. So, how easy, how hard was it to get people to agree to devote 5 full days to this?
Well, I think there's a lot of steps that happened before we got to the 5 day residential. And so I said the project lasted for 4 years, but actually the first year and a half was really devoted to a sort of a huge diagnostic that we did involving members of the association. And I interviewed 70 different people across the country, as well as staff, but 70 different members across the country, current members, past members, lapsed members of every age group. And that became the basis of this second RFP that then went on to become this rethinking of the association. But in that, we had understood that there was significant work to be done because there was beginning of some disengagement, and we needed to really work on that as an association. So the motivation to get things done was fairly high when we started the second portion of the mandate, which was then 2 years, and then there was another those 6 months that got tagged on. But so the residential happened towards the latter part of the 2 years, so somewhere towards the end of the whole arc. And at that point, a lot had been done. The board had been met many, many times, and I think people were very clear on the fact that the governance structure it wasn't sustainable, and that it wasn't going to be the right structure to help them do the work that they wanted to do on behalf of their members.
Right.
So they kept saying form needs to follow function. And so once the strategy was approved, then they said, now we have to get to the form and figure out how we organize ourselves to do it. But all this said and done, frankly, I'm in awe of the fact that they did give this much time, because we're talking about, like I said, the 15 people, 10 were volunteers. This wasn't their day job. This was their volunteer work to an association that they were a member of and that they thought highly of. But, this is their and so we structured it so that we had, I think it was from the Wednesday to the Sunday afternoon, so that people could then, take a weekend and a bit out of work and a bit out of a weekend. But most of these people were flying in, one person from the north, one person from Victoria, one person from the Atlantic. All these people, the travel times are huge. So it was really 7 days that they were giving with travel time. So it is incredible. And then there's the 5 people who were senior staff, and one could argue, well, these people were the staff of the organization, so it's part of their work. But actually, it wasn't. This was over and above their regular job in the association. So for all of them, it was amazing commitment, and I think that's something to know about this group, that the work that they were able to achieve is largely a function of how committed they were to getting there. So indeed, what we did with them in the 5 days is we worked using design thinking. And within that, the approach, which is rapid iterative prototyping, was an essential part of our design, where people would be sent off with a time-bound, short time-bound period where they would go off and redesign, and then they would come back. They would be split up in groups, go design in that short stint with a lot of time pressure, come back, present to the group, integrate, feedback to each other, integrate things that were similar in the things they were doing, go back out, redesign again, go tackle some of the problems that they were facing, and come back. And that's the back and forth that we had going on for the better part of those 5 days. So we used design thinking, we used rapid iterative prototyping, we used creative inputs that were given to them, so as ways to spark their thinking into these short stints of design work that they were doing. And for those, we called upon 3 governance experts, and very fast, like 3 pretty strong governance experts. And what was fascinating is the 3 of them came back with 3 completely different models. So there was one that was an iteration on the federation model. There was one that was a different tack taken, resembling more of a corporate model. What would this organization look like if it was under a corporate model? And the third one, which was really more of a DP2 kind of approach. So we had 3 very different creative inputs for them as ways to spark their thinking into what could be done potentially. And so, and maybe perhaps the last piece that I should add is that there was a lot of preparation work that these people did before they ever got into the 5 days. We had put 5 different books out there for them to choose and read one of them. Many people read 3 to 5 of them. So they actually, they got into this in a big way. We had all sorts of research that we had been done prior, where, data on the association, on its structure, on some of the research we had done, and stacks of information that had been given to them to read, again, before ever coming into the 5 days. So they didn't come in cold into this.
And most of them, your impression was most of them actually had gone through this material before arriving.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, to varying levels of depth, but most of them, so much so that, we were asking them to read one book, and a lot of them came back and said, I read them all. It's like, wow. So they were very key. So without getting into, the detail of the design itself, I mean, those were the big building blocks. Some of the highlights of this and some of the takeaways that we had, and when I'm saying we, I do want to mention that this is something I did with Alicia Pace and Dan Seguin, 2 really wonderful HSI grads that I was working with in this project, and we did this residential together. So some of the findings that we had were design thinking really works for this kind of intangible, complex problem, which is interesting. I mean, I think more and more there's a body of work out there that shows and tends to confirm that, yes, it is something you can use when you're working with intangibles. But it's interesting when you think that, this comes from industrial design work, like building products and having people work with props and bricolage to design a fake product and to get their ideas out. But it truly does work with this world of intangible, complex systems. Mm-hmm. So that was interesting to actually witness that and go through that process with them. The other thing I think that is a takeaway, for me at least, is that this time-boxed way that we were working, where we would split the group, the 15 would be split in 3 groups of 5, and we'd send them out. And then we'd say, okay, you have 45 minutes. So really compressed time. And we said, you need to redesign not this part or that part. You need to redesign the whole thing. So remember these 13 offices, these layers of boards, the 15 boards and the central board, and then the council that was up above, and a very complex system. And we said, no, you redesign the whole block. And what was great about that is that instead of getting lost in the weeds, which there was many, many weeds to get lost in, they actually had to go to the bigger picture, and they had to go to the low-hanging fruit, because in 45 minutes, there was no way that they were going to get to something interesting if they went into too much detail. And that became, I think, the saving grace of their ability to get somewhere with this very complex piece. So they'd come back after 45 minutes, they'd compare notes amongst the three groups, ask questions about the thinking. And so and they were, all three of them were doing the same thing in parallel, so that when they would come back, they're really comparing notes, and they can say, we were stuck on this point. What did you guys do? And then they'd share, and then they'd come to some common conclusions, and we'd start seeing common ground start appearing. If my memory serves correctly, not after the first iteration, but after the second iteration, we started having common ground that was growing and growing and growing, and started to become their model.
So,
and then, yeah.
So I want to just try something with you, and I want you to argue with me if this does not sound like it's accurately describing what you are presenting to us today. So I think to myself, okay, so they gave them limited periods of time and a huge task. And it was the right task. It was the real task that needed to be done. And so you said that people looked at the big picture, people looked for low-hanging fruit. And what shows up for me is I'm thinking, so they needed to get to action quickly. They needed to find things that they could talk about quickly that were meaningful. And there was no time to take a kind of slow, reflective, I'm going to try to think of everything and design everything. And when I'm saying what shows up for me, like the idea that a group of people in a vacuum could come up with the perfect design is kind of absurd. And you're going to come up with the answer through trial and error, through discussion, through trying things out. And so why not use a process that encourages that, rather than, go off for 6 months with a think tank, imagining that, a group off in a corner really is going to be able to come to grips with all of the complexity in this system. That's how that shows up for me.
Absolutely. And the fact that the composition of the group was an important part, because they, as I said before, they were a very diverse group. So you had on the system many different perspectives. So because it was a complex system, they were not all sitting from the same angle. They were looking at it. They were really looking at the elephant from all sides.
Right.
So when they came in, they had these various perspectives. And so when we said, go for the low-hanging fruit, it was the low-hanging fruit of these various perspectives. So after a few iterations, then they got stuck, because then they had gotten the low-hanging fruit, and now they had to delve into some of the sticky problems. And that was more difficult.
Right.
For sure. However, one of the things we found is, as well, is, you can think 5-day residential, you're going to get into a major amount of group dynamics within that. And what was interesting is that there were group dynamics, no doubt, that we did have to manage. But by and large, again, I think a factor of rapid iterative prototyping, people were in creative work mode the majority of the time. So, right. So that was really interesting.
Now I hear you say that, and then I think about my own experiences, and particularly when I was fairly new to this kind of consulting, and I thought, that I began to notice when working with a group, often a group a large group of professionals of some sort who were trying to think in new ways about their work, about how they fit into their organization or their market niche or whatever. And so they were trying to do some big thinking and some actual design to come up with new things that could improve their position and improve the work that they did. It was like I started to notice, once I'd done it enough times, that there would be different sorts of moods in the room at different times. Different people would come to play somewhat different roles over the process. It was often the case that, on the second day, the devil's advocate would emerge, and this role would come out, and this role. It wasn't smooth sailing all the way. There were some barriers along the way. And I note, I think I've told you that I read a lot of Adam Cahane's work this past fall. He describes these massive processes to bring about broad social change. And he describes that kind of thing about the mood of the group and the role of different individuals over time. And so, you're saying group dynamics was not the main event. And thank goodness for that, because that can take you into sort of a quasi T group experience or something, and that they were largely in work mode. But I would love to hear about, say, an example of a bump in the road that came up, as the group was attempting to deal with this very difficult thing, and how you and the team and the other members of the group handled that, if you can think of an example.
Well, there was one moment in the 5 days that truly felt like a make or break. And there was one real big roadblock. So in our design, we had planned to give them a night off on the third night. So the fourth night would be the last night before the fifth day when they would eventually leave. And we had determined that the best time to give them a break would be that third night. And it became a thing with them because they actually negotiated with us because there was a hockey game they wanted to see on the fourth night. And so they started negotiating, well, why the third night? We'll hang in there and, give us the break on the fourth night. We could go see this hockey game. We'll be happy. And we said, yeah, no, let's keep it on the third night. And so lo and behold, on that third day, now, 3 days in, that's a fairly long time that you've been with this group of 15 plus 3 facilitators, like it's almost 20 people day in, day out that you're with. And come day one, you're entering, you're getting into it, starting to figure out this task. They did their first prototype that day. And then day 2, you do a couple more. So the first one you do, it's sort of, oh, okay, how far did we get? And then the second day, they do a couple more. And then, okay, the low-hanging fruit are gone now. And now you're into the crux of more difficult stuff that's not going to solve itself that quickly. And then you get to day 3, and now you get to the end of day 3, and you're still stuck with some of these sticky problems. And you have no idea how you're going to get through them. And now they can see the end, like they can see that there's less time in front than there was in back, and that they're still stuck with these issues. So by 5 o'clock, when we did our checkout, before people left for that evening, and they could either get together with someone, they could go to their room, they could go for a drive, they could do whatever they wanted, they were free. That checkout was, contrary to what I've been saying, highly emotional, tears in the group. And one person who was, these were all leaders. This person was quite an influential member of the whole system, said, to be honest, when he was his turn to check out, he said, to be honest, I'm not sure if I'm going to come back tomorrow. I'm going to, go take a break tonight. And, but frankly, I don't know to what end I would come back, because I've been putting out this opinion I have and this perspective I have, and I've tried explaining it as best I can. And I've done it repeatedly, and I'm not getting any traction on it. And we seemed to be butting heads. And I don't want to hold back the group. So I would rather step down and say, you know what, I've done my best, but I don't know that it's worthwhile that I come back. So that was our checkout.
Wow.
And we went to talk to this individual separately and said, you know, of course, this is your decision, whatever you decide, but we would very much appreciate if you consider coming back. Your voice is important, and it's not about getting to a compromise. It's not about negotiating. It's not about, that's not what's going to get us to the right place. So if you can bear to give this another chance and come back, we would much rather work it through with you than come to an easy compromise without you. But we didn't know what he was going to do. And so Alicia, Dan, and I went away and had supper outside the compound where we had been staying, and, you know, spoke about what things had been like and where we were and what we could possibly do. So the next morning, when everybody came back, this gentleman indeed decided to come back, which was amazing. And what we had decided to do as a result of where the group was to introduce polarity management. And there's this saying in HSI that we often hear, there's nothing as practical as a good theory. And this was the perfect example of that, because the place where they were stuck was really a polarity. And it was a polarity around, do we need to centralize or do we need to decentralize? And they were butting heads because it was an either or approach that was keeping them stuck in that rhetoric. And so that morning, we presented 15 minutes of what is polarity management. And, you know, we said, here is something that illustrates where you are right now. And what that allowed is it showed them that it wasn't them, that it wasn't because they weren't making it through, that this was something that they had to approach differently, that they were never going to solve it. And so it wasn't about solving it. It was about coming to a higher perspective in order to embrace both sides of the equation and not either one or the other. And lights were going off in their eyes clearly, and there was soon thereafter a breakthrough on some of these issues. And if we had started off on day one by saying, you know, some of the challenges you're going to face are going to be polarities, not, you know, we would have been talking in a vacuum.
Yeah.
It would have done zero. It would have not landed anywhere.
Yeah.
But in the context where they were facing this problem and they had been wrestling with it enough, it was really a gateway to open new possibilities. So that was one of the bumps and how we got through it.
The way that occurs for me, Louise, is that that they were in the grip of this dilemma. They were being subject to it. They were being held by this very real and significant dilemma that had come up during the process, and that your intervention allowed them to loosen the grip of the dilemma and to make that which they were subject to into an object that they could now look at and consider and work on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and
it depersonalized it.
Right. Yeah.
It wasn't about I'm not able to get my point through.
Right.
It was about it's normal that there be different perspectives, and we don't need to convince each other.
Yeah.
We need to manage it.
Right.
And so that it was really quite impressive how it.
Oh, I love that. It's you know, that's one of the reasons why I continue to be a very strong advocate of the process consultation approach. One of the things that process consultation can do is the very thing that you have just described. It can help people who are in the grip of some problematic situation, some terrible organizational or social dilemma. It can help people to loosen that grip, to look at others who hold different views and see them as fellow human beings rather than enemies or opponents, and get back to rolling up your sleeves and thinking, well, so what can we do about it? And for the things we can't do anything about, how can we live with it? How can we just carry on together?
Exactly.
Yeah, nice, nice.
Now, these aren't Adam Kahane type situations.
Right, right.
They're much more controllable. They're much less. The actors were diverse, but I mean, not the FARCs against the government. I mean,
Right.
it wasn't
Yeah,
to that extent.
yeah, of
but
course.
It's fascinating to see it work.
Yeah. So, Louise, we have talked now for half an hour, and I just want to respect your time and also see if there's any final thought about this 5-day residential that you would like to leave people with.
I think it's important, and going back full circle to the first question you asked about, getting a 5 days. I think it's really, really important to push to get these things when there's a real issue in a system and you want to get to the other side of it, you want to get to some resolution. I think we do a disservice to ourselves when we accept doing less than what's required to get to the other side.
Right.
And that's always difficult. How much does it take? Would 4 days be enough? Was 6 days have been better? It's hard to get to that precise element, but going into the system, at least in the context such as this one, where the system is asking to say, we want to get past it. I mean, if there's not that desire, then that's a different story. You probably want to edge your way in, but with a system that says we want to get through it, I think it's important to put in front of them big asks and hopefully get them.
Right. Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much for telling us this story of this large project. And I'm going to be trying to persuade you to come back and tell us about some other aspects of this project for us at some point. So, but any event right now, Louise, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Jamie.